In 35 years, if your players were asked to list their top influences in their lives, where would you want to rank? Top 3, top 5? That's where I'd want to rank. Where would you want to rank? And then ask yourself, are you doing what it takes to rank there for your players right now? Because you are a powerful authority figure in your players' lives. I mean, you're not only in the position of teacher and leader, you hold authority over what is really important to them, and that's their basketball career and their basketball life. And you have the power to inspire and build up, and you also have the power to tear down. You have the power to tear down. It's an awesome responsibility, and it's a noble profession. It is a really noble profession. But you have a ton of power in your players' lives. And what I would ask of you is to be thoughtful about it, and especially don't abuse it. One of the things as a high school coach, and I know most of you are high school coaches, some of you are youth coaches, AAU coaches, you don't get to choose your players. You don't get to choose your players. So that can be difficult. But you have to remember too, your players didn't get to choose you either. And as important as it is to teach players how to play, it's even more important, I think, to have a great relationship with them. And we talk all the time in basketball, especially as you get to some of the higher levels and you get into some of this NCAA stuff that I deal with from time to time. And you hear all the time, yeah, only 2% of basketball players go on to play in college, or only X% go on to be pros. Okay, well, if that's true, and I believe it to be true, I think some of those numbers are a little bit skewed. But if we really believe that most of these players aren't going to play beyond high school, then isn't our responsibility to make that experience a rewarding one, and a valuable one, and a positive one? Because we can do that. And we can be demanding without being demeaning. You know, you can be as demanding as you want to. But I read that in Tony Dungy's book. It said you can be demanding without being demeaning. That has nothing to do with the volume of your voice. It has nothing to do with yelling. It has nothing to do with you can whisper something demeaning to a player and they'll remember it for the rest of their lives. You can yell something positive and it's not a problem. It's not a question of volume. You can be demanding without being demeaning. You are here as a coach for your players. Your players are not here for you. You're here for them. Now that doesn't mean that you don't hold them accountable or you don't make things difficult. You can make it as difficult as you want. The players will respond, but you're here for them. And that's one of the rewarding things. Like, look, the wins, you know, Mark Adams had talked about it's about way more than winning. Winning is a byproduct of doing things the right way. If you teach and coach the right way, the wins will follow. The wins will follow that. All right, if this is just about winning for anyone, any coach, any player, it's not going to be a rewarding experience. That's not what players take with them for the rest of their lives, is how you won. It's the relationships you have, it's the fact you invested in them, that you coached them every day, that you had a relationship with every one of your players, that you cared about them off the court and on the court. Kevin Eastman has been a great mentor of mine over the years. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Kevin, but he's a basketball lifer and one of the smartest basketball people that I've ever been around. And Kevin says all the time, catch them doing something right. That it's important that we are always, you know, when you're in a coaching or teaching situation, you always want to be to correct when things aren't done properly. But catch them doing something right. And Dean Smith used to say, praise the action that you want repeated. Praise the action that you want repeated. So you teach them how to play, you improve their skills, But as important as that is, you teach them also how to act and how to interact with one another and interact with others, both on and off the floor. And I'll give you an example. I run a couple of basketball camps during the summer for high school players. And it's not for the top 100 guys, it's for players that are a little further down the food chain, that will likely play in college, but their decision is going to be, do I go Division I? Maybe I should play Division II or Division III. You know, they're not exactly sure where they fit in. It's not a no-brainer for them because they're being recruited by all the Power 5 schools, and it's just a question of what they choose. We spend a ton of time talking to them, not just about their play on the court, but about how they handle themselves. How do they interact with their coaches? How do they interact with their teammates? How do they deal with issues of being in that setting? And one of the examples that we use is, as the camp starts, when we are doing our first orientation, I bring in the custodial staff of the gym. And I introduce each one of them, especially if they're not there. Obviously I can't do it, but try to have them there and make sure that I let the players know, or we let the players know, that these are the people who are charged with keeping this facility clean and the maintenance of the facility. So if you leave something lying around, here are the people that are going to pick it up. And so that they can put a face with that action. So if they're taking their tape off and they decide they're going to throw it somewhere, somebody's got to pick that up. Now, what would you think if you were making somebody else's mother or father or sister or brother or grandfather pick stuff up? A teammate of yours is making your parent do that. You'd have a problem with it. And you talk to them about how they behave in the dorm. When they're in hotels, all these players spend time in hotels. Are you going to keep your hotel room clean? Because somebody has to come in, it's their job to come in there and clean up after you. So are your towels going to be all over the floor? You know, I actually spend a lot of time thinking, I'm in hotels all the time, and I can't tell you how many times I'm leaving a room, and I'm just about to open the door, and I see a towel that I left over the shower or something like that, and I make sure I put it with everything else, so that I'm making the housekeeping professional's job as easy as possible. You know, that's part of being a good citizen. It's part of being a good teammate. And it's part of understanding that it's not just about you. And so you're not just teaching them, you know, Sue Phillips had talked earlier about look at one another in the eye. You know, you teach them how to act and how to interact. You teach them how to meet failure and success with equanimity. All right, it's the same. You know, you're going to have moments of failure. How do you react to that? And that's a big part of this. It is not just about basketball. It is about far more than that. You want to teach them also to be appreciative of their role and to be appreciative of the roles of their teammates. And that's important for every coach too, that you are going to have to set out parameters for roles. And a player's role is not necessarily what that player's capable of doing. It's not, you know, when I was in college, I was called a role player. And I was pretty damn proud of that. But a lot of people hear role player and they hear limited. Truth is, I was limited. But my teammates appreciated the role that I played, and my coaches made me feel special because of the role that I played. You know, we were taught to be a star in our role. Now, your role's not necessarily who you are, but it's what your team needs you to do in order to be successful, in order to win a championship. But if you have a relationship with your players where you're able to say, hey, we need you to do this, you praise the action you want repeated, you praise players for the role that they're playing for your team, you will have a much happier team, and you'll have players that understand it's more than about them. Somebody's going to be the leading scorer, but that doesn't mean it's not their responsibility. They don't have a responsibility to honor the job that's being done of the player that's not getting the headlines, the players that aren't getting the headlines. You also have to teach them to lead and teach them to act without being directed. Teach them to lead each other and teach them to act without being directed. And, you know, for all of you, I'm not sure that every one of you were in here when Coach Sue Phillips was out here with her clinic demonstration, the way she interacted with the players. But it was a prime example of a coach that can coach anything. Any player can play for Sue Phillips in any sport. She's remarkable. And when they were, you know, she's trying to put something in, and when things were not going the way they should, she handled it quickly. She handled it authoritatively, never raised her voice. And when she said, I'm not sure that this would be able to play for me, this would be able to start for me, or even come off the bench for me. Did you see how much better things got right away? Nobody had to yell. Nobody had to call a name. I mean, that was maybe the best thing that you could have seen in any of these settings. And you've seen some amazing stuff. I was blown away by that. And it just sort of reinforces what I've always believed about sports and about basketball. Because I remember everything my coaches said to me, everything. And you remember how it was said, and you remember the way you were dressed. And I would run through a brick wall for the coaches that I played for. I think most players would do that. But how you're dealt with is every bit as important as what's said. As a coach, you want to have a relationship with every player. Now, you'll hear some coaches say you have to have your best relationship with your best player. That may be true, but you have to have a relationship with every player. And that's certainly what makes it more rewarding for a coach. But every player's got to be important on your team. And you have to have a relationship with every player. General Martin Dempsey, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he's just retired, talks a lot about leadership. And he puts three things forward of a great leader, which I think go to being an outstanding coach: character, competence, and humility. All right, character is not something we need to go too much into, because character is who you are. You know, and oftentimes your character is going to be revealed under stress. But I am confident that everybody in this room is of high character, and to be put in a position of being in charge of the development of young people. Competence, that's your expertise. The fact that you are here speaks well of your competence and the fact that you want, as Mark said, you want to get better. Mark Adams will say with this, get better. You want to improve yourself, because you have got to be an expert in this game. You've got to be an expert in your system, and you've got to be an expert in your team. Now, if you will look over, you're all facing me, you look over to your right, one of the things you'll see coaches like Frank Martin and John Carroll, and Sue Phillips is still here, Mark Adams here. They're all here listening to other coaches. They're taking notes. They're trying to get better. They're trying to be experts in their field in every facet of the game. But they've also, that's part of the competence issue, but it's also the humility thing. That none of us know everything. Nobody does. Nobody knows everything about this game. It's constantly changing, it's constantly evolving, and we're constantly learning more and more about the game. That's one of the great things about it. But that you're willing to listen, willing to learn from other people, and you understand that it's not about you, it's about us. You know, it's a we mentality. And I think that's a huge factor in being an outstanding coach. If your players know, if you've got the humility with your players to know that, hey, it's going to be your way, but you're willing to listen to your players, not necessarily during practice, but you're willing to listen to your players and what they have to say and learn from them as they learn from you, they will do anything you ask them to do. I really believe that. And the ones who don't, then you've got the ability to get them to send them to the bench or send them beyond the bench. As a coach, I had a friend of mine tell me this about 20 years ago. As a coach, you're the guardian of the culture of your program. You're the guardian of the culture of your program. So we talk about culture a lot, and you hear that a lot. And, you know, what does culture mean to you? Does anybody want to answer that?
Kind of like the expected behavior of your surroundings.
The expected behavior of your surroundings. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. Culture is the way we do things here. It's your identity. I think you should be able to tell the culture of a program by watching a team practice from their practice plan. What are you about? You know, what do you do? What do you emphasize? And I've written down a few things. What culture you establish with your team is going to be what you see on the floor. I mean, it's going to be reflected in what you see on the floor, and it's going to be reflected in what you see on the floor in the fourth quarter under stress. That's when your culture is going to be completely revealed, when your team is under stress. When they're tired, when they're down, late in a game, that's when your culture will absolutely be revealed. So ask yourself, what are your absolutes? What are your standards? What are your non-negotiables? You know, I can't answer all those things for you. I'll list a few things because I made a few phone calls. And here's some of what I got. I asked some coaches, how would you describe your culture? One coach said, we have a culture of truth, honesty, and hard work. Another said, we have a culture of self-evaluation. We are relentlessly self-critical, and we take action to improve. Another said, we have a culture of execution. We do it right or we do it again. Another said, we have a culture of excellence. We are in relentless pursuit of excellence in everything we do. So your culture, is it reflected in your practice plans? Is it reflected in what you do every day? And is it reflected in how you basically reward your players? Years ago, when Bo Ryan was the coach at Wisconsin, I was at one of his practices, and if you'll remember at that time, Wisconsin hardly ever turned the ball over. They turned it over maybe 8, 9 times a game at the most. They led the nation in fewest turnovers, and they were an extraordinarily efficient team. And when I was at Wisconsin's practices, you'd watch their drills, and it didn't look much different than other practices that I go to. I mean, that's one of the joys of my job is I get to see everybody's practices, and you get to see all these different coaches in action. It's a tremendous learning experience. But it wasn't like they had these magic drills that kept them from turning the ball over. And so I asked Bo about it after practice, and he said something that's always stuck with me. He said, in coaching, it's not what you say, it's what you accept. It's not what you say, it's what you accept. And think about that. Think about, it's amazing all the coaching phrases and the phraseology and the terminology that's used. But you can say it all you want to. If you accept something different, the players know it. And if you accept something different from your best player than you do from your lesser players, your players further down the bench, they know that too. It's not what you say, it's what you accept. So your team's competitive DNA, reflected in your practice plan. You see it on the floor. What do you believe in? What's your philosophy? What can you control? All right, well, Jim Calhoun was the head coach at UConn. He's a 3-time national champion, one of 6 coaches now that's won 3 titles or more in NCAA men's basketball. He had 4 things that he felt that he could control and that they put great emphasis on. Number 1 was defense, transition defense, No easy baskets, no paint, contest all shots, play without fouling. Even marginal players can be really good defensive players, and they can be good team defensive players. You can control how good of a defensive team you are. It's not a question of, you may not be able to be a pressing team and all that, but you can control having an excellent defense. Rebounding. Now, Jim Calhoun had some great rebounders on his team a lot of years, and a lot of great shot blockers and a lot of great athletes. But he acknowledged that even average players can box out. Even average players can box out and keep their guy from getting rebounds. You can be a good rebounding team if you emphasize it. If the emphasis is all 5 guys to the defensive glass, gang rebounding, it's a finish to your defense. The next is conditioning. You can control the kind of condition you are in. So you can be the best conditioned team if it's reflected in your drill work. Your shooting drills should be conditioning drills as well. Every drill, I have a lot of coaches who say every drill we do is a rebounding drill, to go back to rebounding. A lot of practices that I go to where the head coach may want to be working on an offensive concept, but one of the assistants is in charge of the defense. That it's going to be competitive, and the defense is going to make it as hard as possible on the offense. They're going to get something out of both ends of the floor in every drill, in everything they do to compete. And the last thing, the fourth thing that Jim Calhoun said is how you can control how hard you play. You can control how hard you play. Now, part of that for me, I think, is attitude and enthusiasm. That you can control your attitude and you can control your enthusiasm. And one of the things that I think was really evident as you watch Sue Phillips and you watch Mark Adams is they are very enthusiastic coaches. But it wasn't like jump up and down cheerleader stuff. It was, but it was energy and it was intense, but there was nothing over the top about it. You can control that. Now, Brad Stevens, when he was at Butler, he's now with the Boston Celtics, one of the extraordinary coaches in all of basketball, in my judgment. He has 6 things. And I want to read them out to you because I think they're important. Number 1 is commitment. And he had a phrase that he got from Doc Rivers, believe or leave. The commitment to buy into your role. And he talked a lot about a role goal. Like what kind of, you can use statistics to help your players be better players. So if you've got you've got big guys, can you get 2 offensive rebounds a half? 1 stick back every quarter, 1 bucket in transition, get to the free throw line 2 times a quarter, things like that. If you give your players those kind of role goals, it can be very effective. Number 2 is prioritization. You emphasize and prioritize your core beliefs. Jeff Van Gundy says your decisions reveal your priorities. Well, your practice plans reveal your priorities too, and what you emphasize. That's a priority. John Gruden was a great resource for me. I wrote a book a few years ago, and John, I had called John and asked him some really pointed questions about how he coached and the things that he valued. And one of the things I asked him was about drill work. I'm a football fan, but I don't claim to know very much about football. I just love watching it. And I asked him, how do you devise your drills in football? And he said 2 things. What do we need to improve upon, and what happens most often in a game? What do we need to improve upon, and what happens most often in a game? And I've heard him say this a number of times. He'd say, when a team starts losing, the coaching staff says, we got to get back to fundamentals. And John's statement was, how do we ever get away from fundamentals? How do we ever get away from fundamentals? That's a question of prioritization. Jeff Van Gundy, who I just mentioned, I want to mention this in the prioritization thing. Your schemes that you use, they'll win. Those won't be the issue. So if you run into some trouble, It doesn't necessarily mean that your scheme is bad or your tactics are bad. So if you're having a problem, if you think, okay, well, my scheme, do it harder, do it better, substitute, and then you can think about the scheme if none of that stuff works. Because your schemes are fine. The plays you run, they'll work. It's a question of how they run them and how your team runs them. So do it harder, do it better, sub, and then you can think about a change in scheme. Tommy Amaker, the head coach at Harvard, likes to say, you can change your tactics, but you don't change your principles. You can change your tactics, but you don't change your principles. That's a question of culture and who you are and who you want to be. Number 3 for Brad Stevens is positioning. Positioning in transition defense. Stopping the ball, staying in front, things like that. Finding shooters, protecting the basket. You know, having a defensive philosophy of forcing tough twos, contested twos. Brad Stevens believes that even marginal athletes can be good defenders. You know, your players should be able to guard just about anything for 2 dribbles. If they are very good athletes, they can pressure. If they're not, they're going to have to play angles. They can still be good defenders, and they can still be good team defenders. Number 4 is awareness. That's part and parcel of a marginal athlete being a good defender or a good rebounder, is having situational awareness, understanding the game after being taught the game so that they can make adjustments and still be effective. Number 5 is execution and technique. Execution and technique. Now that's about preparation, and it's about committing to the details. And one of the things I would point that out about is about shooting. You know, Bob Knight used to say that too many coaches take a break in practice for shooting. Shooting should be a big part of your practice. A big part of your practice, not take a break from practice so guys can shoot or players can shoot. And there are a couple things like, so you want players taking game shots from game spots at game speed. But at the same time, there's got to be an attention to detail on technique. So it doesn't all have to be 1,000 miles an hour in order for shooting form to be worked on, all right? But you do want to have things done at an appropriate pace most of the time. But there are other times when you've got to just do things for form reasons that are going to be rote. Mark Adams was talking about Kyrie Irving throwing the ball off the, that's not something that takes a ton of energy. You don't have to make a V cut or do the warrior drill or all these different things to get conditioning to do things like that. But it's got to be done for execution and technique, and that's part of having a culture of execution. Number 6 is completion, and that is finish everything. The last part has to be the strongest part in anything you do. Games are won and lost in the 4th quarter or at the end of games when everybody's tired. Finishing plays in practice in everything is really important. I used to have a teammate named Mark Allery who grew up in Phoenix and was a great player. I mean, he wasn't a good player, he was a great player. And one of the most competitive guys I'd ever been around. Was an outstanding perimeter shooter. So when we would do a shooting drill and his goal was to make 9 out of 10, there were times where he made the first 9, but if he missed it, if he missed the 10th one, he kind of went nuts at times. He'd kick the ball, and we used to call him Ray Guy because the ball had hit the top of the stadium. But he would get really upset. And I asked him one time, I go, you hit 9 out of 10, like you met your goal. Why were you upset? He goes, because I missed the last one. And he was very analytical about things, and he talked about if I missed and I knew it wasn't technique, it was my concentration. Like he knew his technique was sound. But as you get to the end of a drill, as you get to the end of the game, that's when your technique and your concentration are more likely to break down. And that's why finishing things has to be emphasized at every level of play. Because it doesn't do you any good to make the best move. You can make the best move you want. If you don't finish it, it didn't do you any good. Didn't do you any good. So completion, I think Brad Stevens is exactly right on that. The last thing is that I wanted to say, and I do want to open it up for questions. I don't know, you may have a few. But it's the idea of being a great teammate. And you can coach being a great teammate. And I hear coaches, I've heard a number of coaches say this, so I don't even know who to give this credit to. But we talk to our players at my camp about be the teammate that you want to play with. Be the teammate that you want to play with. Because all of them have expectations of what their teammates should do. But we're all really good at knowing what somebody else should do. But what about what we should do? You know, are we self-critical? Do we self-evaluate? Am I the teammate that I want to play with? Am I helping my teammates out? You know, like your job really is when I talked about being an expert before about competence, being an expert in your team's offensive system, your team's defensive system, and your team's communication system. Because you're going to have offense, defense, and communication. And teaching your players how to communicate, not just talk on the floor about calling out screens and, you know, early, loud, and continuous to do all that, but to be able to communicate teammate to teammate on and off the floor, to be responsible for more than just you. When a player's late, and we do this at camp all the time, my camp all the time, player's late, it is not just the player that's late. We get on, we hold accountable the player's roommate and then the people on their hall, because they're all going to the same places. So why did you not communicate? If you saw a closed door and why didn't you knock? You know, take responsibility for more than just you. Let me open it up for some questions. If anybody's got any questions about anything I may have seen or anything I've said, I'd be more than happy to answer it. Who would I say is my biggest mentor? It's been Coach K. That when I played for him, he's still, I think my first year at Duke was his third. So he was young, much younger then, so was I, and was incredibly intense. But I would venture to say that the core beliefs I have in basketball are because of him. And the way I look at the game, the way I look at other things in life is in direct measure because of him. He's been an extraordinary influence in my life. And one of the great things, and I think this would apply to everyone here, that he's coached me for 35 years now. You know, I played for him for 4, but he's coached me for 35. That's the kind of influence he's been, that I can pick up the phone and call him for advice, and I have done that. And that's been an extraordinary happening for me, and it's been an incredible blessing. And I've had teachers and other people in my life, my parents, other people in my life that have been that kind of influence. But like I started out with, if I were to list my influences outside of my mom and dad, he'd be next. He would be next. And it's about way more than basketball. It went way beyond that. I knew every day that if I didn't do what I was supposed to do, I was going to hear about it. But if I did what I was supposed to do, I was going to hear about it too. And that he was totally invested in making me better. And so was his entire staff. And I hope I responded positively to it. I gave everything I had, I know that. But it was, I mean, it's one of the great, there's nothing else in life like basketball, like sports. And being, you know, like the difference, what I would hope for you and your players is that after that, they know the difference about being on a team and being a member of a team. A bunch of people have been on a team. Not as many have been a member of a team. Because being a member of a team means you've got responsibilities outside of you that you take care of, and you take care of one another. It's an awesome responsibility. And to me, there's no greater compliment than you can give somebody to say, man, that guy was a great teammate. You know, I play with some great teammates. I play with Tommy Amaker and Johnny Dawkins and Mark Allery and David Henderson, Quinn Snyder, Danny Ferry. The guys I played with were amazing teammates, amazing. I don't know if they'd say the same thing about me, but that's what I say about them. I was honored to play with them every day. I respected what I saw every day. There wasn't a day that I didn't leave practice going, man, I can't believe I get to play with these guys. just about every day. There are a couple days where I didn't, I wasn't sure I needed to, but I loved it. And that was a reflection of the culture that our coach established and that we bought into. And we encouraged each other to do the right thing. Because one thing you know is your players know what right looks like. So encourage them to seek it out, seek out right. Again, please reach out to me anytime. I'd be more than happy to share whatever I have. And if there's anything I can do to help you, I'm always willing to do that. And I can't tell you how not only proud I am to be here and for the job that Don Showalter and his staff do, and Jay Demings with USA Basketball, but for all these great coaches to spend their time with you is really a remarkable thing. It speaks really well of our game that so many people want to share what they know, and because somebody did it for them, and they're doing it for others. And I think that's a great thing in our game. But thank you very much.